The master's yearning for his own devotees. Contact with the Brahmos increased Sri Ramakrishna's longing to encounter aspirants who would be able to follow his teachings in their purest form. There was no limit, he once declared, to the longing I felt at that time. During the daytime, I somehow managed to control it. The secular talk of the worldly minded was galling to me, and I would look wistfully to the day when my own beloved companions would come. I hoped to find solace in conversing with them and relating to them my own realizations. Every little incident would remind me of them, and thoughts of them wholly engrossed me. I was already arranging in my mind what I should say to one and give to another, and so on. But when the day would come to a close, I would not be able to curb my feelings. The thought that another day had gone by and they had not come oppressed me. When during the evening service the temples rang with the sound of bells and conch shells, I would climb to the roof of the kuti in the garden and, writhing in anguish of heart, cry at the top of my voice, "Come, my children! Oh, where are you? I cannot bear to live without you." A mother never longed so intensely for the sight of her child, nor a friend for his companions, nor a lover for his sweetheart, as I longed for them. Oh, it was indescribable. Shortly after this period of yearning, the devotees began to come. In the year 1879, occasional writings about Sri Ramakrishna by the Brahmos in the Brahmo magazines began to attract his future disciples from the educated middle-class Bengalis, and they continued to come till 1884. But others too came feeling the subtle power of his attraction. They were an ever-shifting crowd of people of all castes and creeds, Hindus and Brahmos, Vaishnavas and Shaktas, the educated with university degrees and the illiterate, old and young, Maharajas and beggars, journalists and artists, pundits and devotees, philosophers and the worldly minded, jnanis and yogis, men of action and men of faith, virtuous women and prostitutes, office holders and vagabonds, philanthropists and self-seekers, dramatists and drunkards, builders up and pullers down. He gave to them all, without stint, from his illimitable store of realization. No one went away empty-handed. He taught them the lofty knowledge of the Vedanta and the soul-melting love of the Purana. 20 hours out of 24, he would speak without rest or respite. He gave to all his sympathy and enlightenment, and he touched them with that strange power of the soul which could not but melt even the most hardened. And people understood him according to their powers of comprehension. The master's method of teaching. But he remained as ever the willing instrument in the hand of God, the child of the Divine Mother, totally untouched by the idea of being a teacher. He used to say that 3 ideas, that he was a guru, a father, and a master, pricked his flesh like thorns. Yet he was an extraordinary teacher. He stirred his disciples' hearts more by a subtle influence than by actions or words. He never claimed to be the founder of a religion or the organizer of a sect. Yet he was a religious dynamo. He was the verifier of all religions and creeds. He was like an expert gardener who prepares the soil and removes the weeds, knowing that the plants will grow because of the inherent power of the seeds, producing each its appropriate flowers and fruits. He never thrust his ideas on anybody. He understood people's limitations and worked on the principle that what is good for one may be bad for another. He had the unusual power of knowing the devotees' minds, even their inmost souls, at the first sight. He accepted disciples with the full knowledge of their past tendencies and future possibilities. The life of evil did not frighten him, nor did religious squeamishness raise anybody in his estimation. He saw in everything the unerring finger of the Divine Mother. Even the light that leads astray was to him the light from God. To those who became his intimate disciples, the Master was a friend, companion, and playmate. Even the chores of religious discipline would be lightened in his presence. The devotees would be so inebriated with pure joy in his company that they would have no time to ask themselves whether he was an incarnation, a perfect soul, or a yogi. His very presence was a great teaching. Words were superfluous. In later years, his disciples remarked that while they were with him, they would regard him as a comrade, but afterwards would tremble to think of their frivolities in the presence of such a person. They had convincing proof that the Master could, by his mere wish, kindle in their hearts the love of God and give them his vision. Through all this fun and frolic, the merriment and frivolity, he always kept before them the shining ideal of God consciousness and the path of renunciation. He prescribed ascents steep or graded according to the powers of the climber. He permitted no compromise with the basic principles of purity. An aspirant had to keep his body, mind, senses, and soul unspotted, had to have a sincere love for God and an ever mounting spirit of yearning. The rest would be done by the mother. His disciples were of two kinds, the householders and the young men, some of whom were later to become monks. There was also a small group of women devotees. Householder devotees. For the householders, Sri Ramakrishna did not prescribe the hard path of total renunciation. He wanted them to discharge their obligations to their families. Their renunciation was to be mental. Spiritual life could not be acquired by flying away from responsibilities. A married couple should live like brother and sister after the birth of one or two children, devoting their time to spiritual talk and contemplation. He encouraged the householders, saying that their life was, in a way, easier than that of the monk, since it was more advantageous to fight the enemy from inside a fortress than in an open field. He insisted, however, on their repairing into solitude every now and then to strengthen their devotion and faith in God through prayer, japa, and meditation. He prescribed for them the companionship of sadhus. He asked them to perform their worldly duties with one hand while holding to God with the other, and to pray to God to make their duties fewer and fewer, so that in the end they might climb to Him with both hands. He would discourage in both the householders and the celibate youths any lukewarmness in their spiritual struggles. He would not ask them to follow indiscriminately the ideal of non-resistance, which ultimately makes a coward of the unwary. Future monks. But to the young men destined to be monks, he pointed out the steep path of renunciation, both external and internal. They must take the vow of absolute continence and eschew all thought of greed and lust. By the practice of continence, aspirants develop a subtle nerve through which they understand the deeper mysteries of God. For them, self-control is final, imperative, and absolute. The sannyasis are teachers of men, and their lives should be totally free from blemish. They must not even look at a picture which may awaken their animal passions. The master selected his future monks from young men untouched by woman and gold, and plastic enough to be cast in his spiritual mold. When teaching them the path of renunciation and discrimination, he would not allow the householders to be anywhere near them. Ram and Ram Mohan. The first two householder devotees to come to Dakshineshwar were Ram Chandra Datta and Manu Mohan Mitra. A medical practitioner and chemist, Ram was skeptical about God and religion and never enjoyed peace of soul. He wanted tangible proof of God's existence. The master said to him, "God really exists. You don't see the stars in the daytime, but that doesn't mean that the stars do not exist. There is butter in milk. But can anybody see it by merely looking at the milk? To get butter, you must churn milk in a quiet and cool place. You cannot realize God by a mere wish. You must go through some mental disciplines." By degrees, the master awakened Ram's spirituality, and the latter became one of his foremost lay disciples. It was Ram who introduced Narendranath to Sri Ramakrishna. Narendra was a relative of Ram. Manu Mohan at first met with considerable opposition from his wife and other relatives, who resented his visits to Dakshineshwar. But in the end, the unselfish love of the master triumphed over worldly affection. It was Manu Mohan who brought Rakhal to the master. Surendra. Suresh Mitra, a beloved disciple whom the master often addressed as Surendra, had received an English education and held an important post in an English firm. Like many other educated young men of the time, he prided himself on his atheism and led a bohemian life. He was addicted to drinking. He cherished an exaggerated notion about man's free will. A victim of mental depression, he was brought to Sri Ramakrishna by Ramchandra Datta. When he heard the master asking a disciple to practice the virtue of self surrender to God, he was impressed. But though he tried thenceforth to do so, he was unable to give up his old associates and his drinking. One day the master said in his presence, "Well, when a man goes to an undesirable place, why doesn't he take the Divine Mother with him?" And to Surendra himself, Sri Ramakrishna said, "Why should you drink wine as wine? Offer it to Kali, and then take it as her prasad, as consecrated drink. But see that you don't become intoxicated. You must not reel and your thoughts must not wander. At first you will feel ordinary excitement, but soon you will experience spiritual exaltation." Gradually, Surendra's entire life was changed. The master designated him as one of those commissioned by the Divine Mother to defray a great part of his expenses. Surendra's purse was always open for the master's comfort. Kedar. Kedarnath Chatterjee was endowed with a spiritual temperament and had tried various paths of religion, some not very commendable. When he met the master at Dakshineshwar, he understood the true meaning of religion. It is said that the master, weary of instructing devotees who were coming to him in great numbers for guidance, once prayed to the goddess Kali, "Mother, I am tired of speaking to people. Please give power to Kedar, Girish, Ram, Vijay, and Mahendra to give them the preliminary instruction, so that just a little teaching from me will be enough." He was aware, however, of Kedar's lingering attachment to worldly things and often warned him about it. Harish. Harish, a young man in affluent circumstances, renounced his family and took shelter with the master, who loved him for his sincerity, singleness of purpose, and quiet nature. He spent his leisure time in prayer and meditation, turning a deaf ear to the entreaties and threats of his relatives. Referring to his undisturbed peace of mind, the master would say, "Real men are dead to the world, though living. Look at Harish, he is an example." When one day the master asked him to be a little kind to his wife, Harish said, "You must excuse me on this point. This is not the place to show kindness. If I try to be sympathetic to her, there is a possibility of my forgetting the ideal and becoming entangled in the world." Bhavanath. Bhavanath Chatterjee visited the master while he was still in his teens. His parents and relatives regarded Sri Ramakrishna as an insane person and tried their utmost to prevent him from becoming intimate with the master. But the young boy was very stubborn and often spent nights at Dakshineshwar. He was greatly attached to Narendra, and the master encouraged their friendship. The very sight of him often awakened Sri Ramakrishna's spiritual emotion. Balaram Bose. Balaram Bose came of a wealthy Vaishnava family. From his youth, he had shown a deep religious temperament and had devoted his time to meditation, prayer, and the study of the Vaishnava scriptures. He was very much impressed by Sri Ramakrishna even at their first meeting. He asked Sri Ramakrishna whether God really existed, and if so, whether a man could realize him. The master said, "God reveals himself to the devotee who thinks of him as his nearest and dearest. Because you do not draw response by praying to him once, you must not conclude that he does not exist. Pray to God, thinking of him as dearer than your very self. He is much attached to his devotees. He comes to a man even before he is sought. There is none more intimate and affectionate than God." Balaram had never before heard God spoken of in such forceful words. Every one of the words seemed true to him. Under the master's influence, he outgrew the conventions of the Vaishnava worship and became one of the most beloved of the disciples. It was at his home that the master slept whenever he spent a night in Calcutta. Mahendra or M. Mahendranath Gupta, known as M, arrived at Dakshineshwar in February 1882. He belonged to the Brahmo Samaj and was headmaster of the Vidyasagar High School at Siam Bazar, Calcutta. At the very first sight, the master recognized him as one of his market disciples. Mahendra recorded in his diary Sri Ramakrishna's conversations with his devotees. These are the first directly recorded words in the spiritual history of the world of a man recognized as belonging in the class of Buddha and Christ. The present volume is a translation of this diary. Mahendra was instrumental through his personal contacts in spreading the master's message among many young and aspiring souls. Nag Mahashaya. Durga Charan Nag, also known as Nag Mahashaya, was the ideal householder among the lay disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. He was the embodiment of the Master's ideal of life in the world, unstained by worldliness. In spite of his intense desire to become a sannyasi, Sri Ramakrishna asked him to live in the world in the spirit of a monk, and the disciple truly carried out this injunction. He was born of a poor family and even during his boyhood often sacrificed everything to lessen the sufferings of the needy. He had married at an early age, and after his wife's death, had married a second time to obey his father's command. But he once said to his wife, "Love on the physical level never lasts. He is indeed blessed who can give his love to God with his whole heart. Even a little attachment to the body endures for several births. So do not be attached to this cage of bone and flesh. Take shelter at the feet of the mother and think of her alone. Thus your life here and hereafter will be ennobled." The Master spoke of him as a blazing light. He received every word of Sri Ramakrishna in dead earnest. One day he heard the Master saying that it was difficult for doctors, lawyers, and brokers to make much progress in spirituality. Of doctors, he said, "If the mind clings to the tiny drops of medicine, how can it conceive of the infinite?" That was the end of Durga Charan's medical practice, and he threw his chest of medicines into the Ganges. Sri Ramakrishna assured him that he would not lack simple food and clothing. He bade him serve holy men. On being asked where he would find real holy men, the Master said that the sadhus themselves would seek his company. No sannyasi could have lived a more austere life than Durga Charan. Girish Ghosh. Girish Chandra Ghosh was a born rebel against God, a skeptic, a bohemian, a drunkard. He was the greatest Bengali dramatist of his time, the father of the modern Bengali stage. Like other young men, he had imbibed all the vices of the West. He had plunged into a life of dissipation and had become convinced that religion was only a fraud. Materialistic philosophy he justified as enabling one to get at least a little fun out of life. But a series of reverses shocked him and he became eager to solve the riddle of life. He had heard people say that in spiritual life the help of a guru was imperative and that the guru was to be regarded as God himself. But Girish was too well acquainted with human nature to see perfection in a man. His first meeting with Sri Ramakrishna did not impress him at all. He returned home feeling as if he had seen a freak at a circus, for the Master, in a semi-conscious mood, had inquired whether it was evening, though the lamps were burning in the room. But their paths often crossed, and Girish could not avoid further encounters. The Master attended a performance in Girish's Star Theatre. On this occasion, too, Girish found nothing impressive about him. One day, however, Girish happened to see the Master dancing and singing with the devotees. He felt the contagion and wanted to join them, but restrained himself for fear of ridicule. Another day, Sri Ramakrishna was about to give him spiritual instruction when Girish said, "I don't want to listen to instructions. I have myself written many instructions. They are of no use to me. Please help me in a more tangible way if you can." This pleased the Master, and he asked Girish to cultivate faith. As time passed, Girish began to learn that the Guru is the one who silently unfolds the disciple's inner life. He became a steadfast devotee of the Master. He often loaded the Master with insults, drank in his presence, and took liberties which astounded the other devotees. But the Master knew that at heart Girish was tender, faithful, and sincere. He would not allow Girish to give up the theatre. And when a devotee asked him to tell Girish to give up drinking, he sternly replied, "That is none of your business. He who has taken charge of him will look after him. Girish is a devotee of heroic type. I will tell you, drinking will not affect him." The Master knew that mere words could not induce a man to break deep-rooted habits, but that the silent influence of love worked miracles. Therefore, he never asked him to give up alcohol, with the result that Girish himself eventually broke the habit. Sri Ramakrishna had strengthened Girish's resolution by allowing him to feel that he was absolutely free. One day Girish felt depressed because he was unable to submit to any routine of spiritual discipline. In an exalted mood, the Master said to him, "All right, give me your power of attorney. Henceforth, I assume responsibility for you. You need not do anything." Girish heaved a sigh of relief. He felt happy to think that Sri Ramakrishna had assumed his spiritual responsibilities. But poor Girish could not then realize that he also, on his part, had to give up his freedom and make of himself a puppet in Sri Ramakrishna's hands. The master began to discipline him according to this new attitude. One day Girish said about a trifling matter, "Yes, I shall do this." "No, no," the master corrected him. "You must not speak in that egotistic manner. You should say, 'God willing, I shall do it.'" Girish understood. Thenceforth, he tried to give up all idea of personal responsibility and surrender himself to the divine will. His mind began to dwell constantly on Sri Ramakrishna. This unconscious meditation in time chastened his turbulent spirit. The householder devotees generally visited Sri Ramakrishna on Sunday afternoons and other holidays. Thus, a brotherhood was gradually formed, and the master encouraged their fraternal feeling. Now and then, he would accept an invitation to a devotee's home, where other devotees would also be invited. Kirtan would be arranged, and they would spend hours in dance and devotional music. The master would go into trances or open his heart in religious discourses and in the narration of his own spiritual experiences. Many people who could not go to Dakshineshwar participated in these meetings and felt blessed. Such an occasion would be concluded with a sumptuous feast. But it was in the company of his younger devotees, pure souls, yet unstained by the touch of worldliness, that Sri Ramakrishna took greatest joy. Among the young men who later embraced the householder's life were Narayan, Paltu, the younger Naren, Tej Chandra, and Purna. These visited the master sometimes against strong opposition from home. Purna. Purna was a lad of 13 whom Sri Ramakrishna described as an Ishvara Koti, a soul born with special spiritual qualities. The master said that Purna was the last of the group of brilliant devotees who, as he once had seen in a trance, would come to him for spiritual illumination. Purna said to Sri Ramakrishna during their second meeting, "You are God Himself incarnated in flesh and blood." Such words coming from a mere youngster proved of what stuff the boy was made. Mahima Charan and Pratap Hazra. Mahima Charan and Pratap Hazra were two devotees outstanding for their pretentiousness and idiosyncrasies, but the master showed them his unfailing love and kindness, though he was aware of their shortcomings. Mahima Charan Chakravarti had met the master long before the arrival of the other disciples. He had had the intention of leading a spiritual life, but a strong desire to acquire name and fame was his weakness. He claimed to have been initiated by Totapuri and used to say that he had been following the path of knowledge according to his guru's instructions. He possessed a large library of English and Sanskrit books, but though he pretended to have read them, most of the leaves were uncut. The master knew all his limitations, yet enjoyed listening to him recite from the Vedas and other scriptures. He would always exhort Mahima to meditate on the meaning of the scriptural texts and to practice spiritual discipline. Pratap Hazra, a middle-aged man, hailed from a village near Kamarpukar. He was not altogether unresponsive to religious feelings. On a moment's impulse, he had left his home, aged mother, wife, and children, and had found shelter in the temple garden at Dakshineshwar, where he intended to lead a spiritual life. He loved to argue, and the master often pointed him out as an example of barren argumentation. He was hypercritical of others and cherished an exaggerated notion of his own spiritual advancement. He was mischievous and often tried to upset the minds of the master's young disciples, criticizing them for their happy and joyous life and asking them to devote their time to meditation. The master teasingly compared Hazra to Jatila and Kutila, the two women who always created obstructions in Krishna's sport with the gopis, and said that Hazra lived at Dakshineshwar to thicken the plot by adding complications.